Hang on. Hey, Dub, you told me to hang on. Is it okay if I start? Okay. He said, hang on. Okay. You didn't tell me it was okay. Good evening. Good to see everybody. You know, I've said this before, when I hear everybody visiting, you know, that's fellowship. And it's really, to me, it's kind of a shame to break it up, you know. But we can get back to that visiting. It's good to hear the chatter of people checking in on each other and caring about each other. It's really good. And that's the way, that's what heaven looks like. Really does. Looks like this. In my mind, anyway. So, okay, let me get to the announcements. And it says, please finish by 6:45 p.m. I guess that means not just the announcements, but okay. I got a little bit of a laugh. That's okay. That's sounds like a Shaggy Dog joke. Okay, there will be breakfast for dinner for the college group at the house tomorrow. 6 p.m. Speak with Tanner Rowland for more information. Supper with the sisters is tomorrow at Alex's Pizza at 6 p.m. All ladies welcome. Please let Joy Lawler or Sarah Henry know if you plan to be there. There will be a game night for the teens this Friday at 6 p.m. at the Khalees. I always pronounce your name wrong. I apologize. Kalish? Oh, I did. Okay, good. I always mispronounce that. Thank you. I was looking for you, and there you are. All right. I hate when people mispronounce somebody. You know, they mispronounce mine. It kind of, ooh. There will be a game night, so at 6 p.m. Remember, our singing practice is on Sunday afternoons from 4 to 5, or maybe a few minutes after. It's okay. In the auditorium. We're learning and practicing songs for the Song Fest on March 4th, so we maybe sound a little better. So please come if you can. Feed the Flock potluck is next Wednesday at 5:30 at the Family Life Center. And make plans to attend the dinner hosted by our teens on February 21st. The theme will be a day at Bible camp. It's always a fun evening and a great way to support our youth and help them raise funds for the mission trip. I'm going to break the rules. Or anything I need to be said besides what I just read? That's usually a bad thing to ask for any other input, but I do it anyway, so sorry. All righty. Elders, don't run me out of church if I do this, because we're going to be raising hands. Okay. I'm going to ask a question, and I want you to raise your hand real high if you think so. Has the world gone crazy? Okay. Fair enough. I got two hands over here. I did a beta test on this on Sunday morning. I was sitting in the back over there, and a sister sitting next to me. I said, let me ask you something, and I asked her that question. And she said, my goodness, yes. It's like, okay, fair enough. I knew it would probably relate, because I feel that way a lot of the time. Stay away from the news, folks. Turn it off. Read your Bible. Watch a episode of The Chosen. Get online and look at one of our good Bible study that are online. Do that instead, please, because that's true. The world has gone crazy. But I want you to think about something, and I'm just going to read what I wrote down. If it has gone crazy and the world seems like it's spiraling, we have a crisis in every corner of the world, people mistreating each other. Has the world ever experienced so many terrible things? Oh, I see a lot of, you can raise your hand. Yeah, it has. It has. So, about perspective. We need some perspective. I was going to drop Mike Allen's name. I don't see him here tonight. He brought something up in a sermon 2 weeks ago that I remembered, and he talked about the recorded history, and they've kind of done some research. And he said in his sermon, I know that I wanted him here to verify this, what he said, but he said out of the 5,000 to 6,000 years of recorded human history, when they kept pretty good records, out of those thousands of years, only about 50 of those years were without conflict. Something major going on. Wars, famines, just you name it, bad. Except for 50 years of that, thousands of years, it was going on. So some of our perspective is because it's in front of our eyes. But if we simply look at history, people are not nice to one another en masse. And that doesn't even include places that didn't have recorded history that we know of now. Like, say, this continent, there were people here, and they weren't very nice to each other. They really mistreated one another. That's the normal. That's the non-Christian thing to do. That's the non-godly way. And that's the majority. So, what do we do as God's people? What do we do? I believe first we need to get we got our perspective, and we saw what mentioned what Mike Allen preached about 2 Sundays ago. I did a little Google search, and it says, Google tells me that they put it in percentages, and it was about 8% of the time frame looks like it was without conflict. And I don't know how that translates into years. That's the Google search will tell you. Most of the time, people are not good to each other. But our perception is right now. And this distracts us from our mission as a Christian. We think, well, why am I bothering? We need to bother. We are what? By what Jesus has called us? He called us salt and light. If we don't do it, who will? And we need to keep that in perspective. Trusting in God when we are surrounded by injustice and conflict can be found in our Bibles. And I would encourage everyone to take a look at a widely studied prophet in the Old Testament. His name was Habakkuk. Who has studied the writings of Habakkuk? Anybody? A few. Everybody needs to take some time and do some home study and see how his attitude was at the beginning of his writings. And this is a prophet of God. He spoke back and forth to God. In the first chapter, we won't read it tonight, but I encourage you to study that. We can get some perspective on what he thought. The minor prophet records the fall of Judah, the southern kingdom, and its captivity by Babylon. And why was God dealing with them that way? Because they were rebellious. They were misbehaving. The kingdom of Judah was misbehaving. The prophet was saying, stop, serve God, turn back, quit doing it. Well, they didn't. And Babylon came in and took them captive, burned Solomon's temple to the ground, and took those people away into captivity. That means they were slaves. They're captive, they're slaves. Their lives were not, and they had to leave. They were forced at the point of a spear to leave. It was a long time they were in captivity. But Habakkuk went back and forth with God. First he said, why are you doing this to us, Lord? Why are you dealing so harshly? Why are your people misbehaving? The conversation goes on till he gets to about chapter 3, and he starts giving blessings to God. He realized God is God, and he is not. And that's the attitude we should have. Why do bad things happen? Well, we live in a fallen world. God doesn't cause them. Why he allows them? We're not God. We have to deal with what we've got. And we think we're persecuted in this country. But I get regular communications from churches that support Christians that are being attacked by Russia. Alzheimer's again. Ukraine. Yes, thank you. I do this all the time. It worries me. I think of my mother when I do that. I go blank, and it's like, okay, Mom, on the way. But yeah, Ukraine. their life and limb, they're being attacked. That country has been oppressed for 1,000 years for the territory because it's good farm ground. That's the breadbasket of that part of the world. But the Ukrainian people still remain. And now the church is being spread there, and it's taken hold. It's taken hold well. What about Afghanistan? I'll say that place. We've got Christians that are in fear of losing their head. There's no doubt, that's when it gets serious. Are you willing to be a Christian even if you're in danger of losing your head? There are Christians there. So we got it pretty easy if somebody made fun of me or talked or poked fun at me or, when's the last time I had to worry about where my next meal was coming from or where my next shelter was coming from? Or if somebody is going to come break in my house and take me away, never to be seen again. So I said all this because we need to keep it in perspective. Yes, the world is crazy, but I believe, depending on where we stand, the world's always been crazy. My dad, I talked to him about this on the phone, and he said, well, yeah, there's something that touched me that I still live with. He said, I was 6 years old on a Sunday, and we had a fancy radio that was run by a great big battery. He said, we didn't have electricity in the house or running water, but we had a radio. And I heard on that big radio that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. It affected him to this day. He said he can't describe how it made him feel. He thought the world was ending, and he was 6 years old. He had uncles that went off to war. About 6 uncles served in various branches, and they all came back, but they carried mental scars mostly. My personal one, I'll tell you, it happened in September, 11th day of 2001. I was at work. I worked in St. Louis at the time. And I was at the dispatcher's window, going to get my next assignment. And a guy I'd worked with for 20 years came up behind me and said, Steve, did you hear a plane at the World Trade Center? And I'm like, how could that be? I was thinking a small plane. How could that be? It's like it's a big building. Was somebody dying behind the controls? And so we went up to the break room, turned on the TV, and I got to see live and in color the second plane. And I saw it was a 747. And I thought, that's not an accident. And we're probably at war. And it affected me because I have 1 son and 4 nephews that enlisted because of that. And they served. And it affected them too. So I'll never forget that feeling, how I felt that day. And how I tried to talk my son and his cousins, don't do that. And they said, we have to. Perspective is everything. The world's been crazy since the world began. We're just living in the here and now of it. So let's not lose perspective. Let's let our light shine and show people who we are and why we care. I'm going to read 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 3 and 4 from the NIV. Paul wrote to Timothy, he said, this is good and pleases God our Savior, who wants all people to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. These verses highlight God's desire for salvation for everyone and the importance of praying for all people, including authorities, as part of a godly life. Have you prayed for a politician you don't like? Anybody? That's what he meant. In the time it was written, who was in authority? Caesar. Pray for Caesar. How about that? Unbelievable, but Paul meant it. And he writes to the church in Rome in chapter 8, and we know that all things work together for good, those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose, for whom he foreknew, he also predestined, that's the church, to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brethren. And that's the twofold eternal purpose of God. He wants all people to be saved, and he wants the saved to be conformed to the likeness of Christ. If we conform ourselves to Christ, we'll do what's right. We'll do and we'll stay focused. And we'll let this noise in the background, hard to ignore, we need to walk past it. And that's all I got tonight. Let's go to God in prayer before we go to class. Heavenly Father, we do thank you for your Son loving us so much, the sacrifice of Christ that lets us be brothers to Christ, lets us be part of heaven's family. We lose sight of that in our busy world. We need to keep focus on it. Help us to be more like Jesus more today than we were yesterday. Help us to stay focused and to care about the people around us and the people we have contact with and not keep it to ourselves. And we ask this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
There's a drug deal going down right here. There's surveillance cameras, you guys know. This is being documented. He's very happy about what he just got. Good evening. Oh, yes, please, the microphone. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you all being here tonight. I want to start by talking about selfish ambition. The Bible, it gives a number of warnings about selfish ambition, and there's also a number of examples in the Bible. You can find plenty of examples from secular history. You may even find some examples from your own life and from people that you have seen where it caused them some problems. Okay, so this is not referring to simply working hard, doing your best. That's not what this is talking about. Selfish ambition is often defined as the pursuit of personal advancement, fame, or gain while disregarding others, God, or wisdom. See, some people, they just want to win at all costs. All right, so if you would, let's be opening up to the book of 2 Samuel. So we're continuing this study of 1st and 2nd Samuel, trying to understand it and trying to find application for 21st century Christians. Okay, so the end of 1 Samuel. We read about David's victory over the Amalekites. Remember, they had plundered and burned Ziklag, and they had kidnapped their wives and children, and then we read about Saul's death. And from that section, I really wanted us to see the importance of acts of kindness, like how they treated the Egyptian slave and sharing the loot, and the men of Jabesh Gilead were some of the examples of that. So today we're going to be looking at 2 Samuel chapters 1 and 2, the first events after Saul's death. Quite a bit that went on those first few years after Saul died there on Mount Gilboa. And from this section, I really want us to see that selfish ambition can get us in a lot of trouble. Now remember, this is a class, and so if you have a question or comment, go ahead and stop us and bring it out. And we do use the microphone in this class, which Kwame will bring to you. And that's so everyone in the class can hear you, but also so everyone who's watching online can hear you. And I do like to have people read. So who would like to start us off this evening with 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 1 through 10. So we're starting here with, we're going to see David's reaction to Saul's death. Who'd like to get that? Okay, thank you.
2 Samuel 1, Now it came about after the death of Saul, when David had returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, that David remained 2 days in Ziklag. On the third day, behold, a man came out of the camp from Saul, with his clothes torn and dust on his head. And it came about when he came to David that he fell to the ground and prostrated himself. Then David said to him, "From where do you come?" And he said to him, "I have escaped from the camp of Israel." David said to him, "How did things go? Please tell me." And he said, "The people have fled from the battle, and also many of the people have fallen and are dead. And Saul and Jonathan his son are dead also." So David said to the young man who told him, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" The young man who told him said, "By chance I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and behold, Saul was leaning on his spear. And behold, the chariots and the horsemen pursued him closely. When he looked behind him, he saw me and called to me. And I said, 'Here I am.' He said to me, 'Who are you?' And I answered him, 'I am an Amalekite.' Then he said to me, 'Please stand beside me and kill me, for agony has seized me, because my life still lingers in me.' So I stood beside him and killed him, because I knew he could not live after he had fallen. And I took the crown which was on his head and the bracelet which was on his arm, and I have brought them here to my Lord."
Good. Okay, so remember Ziklag, where David and his men were living at this time, is thought to have been located about 12 miles north of Beersheba in the land of Simeon. From what I understand, there's a bit of argument about that. But the battle took place on Mount Gilboa, which was up in Manasseh. Okay, so verse 2, of course, ancient sign of mourning, tearing the clothes, throwing dust on the head. So he's showing that he's mourning for Israel's defeat. And we learned that this guy was an Amalekite. All right, so again, what's the problem with us finding an Amalekite here in our text? Yes, Saul was supposed to wipe them all out in 1 Samuel 15. Okay, so he might have been a mercenary, but it seems from verse 13 that he was a resident alien in Israel. So some people think that he was a scavenger, and he just was simply there to rob the fallen soldiers of their valuables. Okay, so what's the problem with this guy's story? Yeah, it's not what happened. Saul killed himself. So I suspect that he must have been watching from a distance, or he just simply came across Saul's body before the Philistines got there. And he saw his opportunity. And he probably thought that David would reward him for killing his rival. And so he took the king's crown, he took the bracelet as well to substantiate this fabrication. I think he lied to try to get David's approval. Now, some skeptics, you will find, they try to argue that, this is just a contradiction in the Bible. But remember, 1 and 2 Samuel were not originally 2 books, they were 1 book. And this is just 20 verses later. Do you really think the author would have forgotten how Saul died in 20 verses? 20 verses later. Anyway, Eric Lyons, he put it like this. The reader must keep in mind that the Bible writers recorded a number of lies made by various people. Satan lied to Eve, Cain lied to God, Samson lied to Delilah, David lied to Ahimelech, the older prophet of 1 Kings 13 lied to the younger prophet, a lie that cost the younger prophet his life. Job's friends repeatedly made false accusations about him throughout the book of Job. Jesus' enemies frequently lied about him, etc. Keep in mind that many of the lies recorded in Scripture were told without further comment by the inspired writers. That is, the writers rarely stopped to identify and condemn the lies explicitly. For example, Moses never explicitly called Satan's statement in Genesis 3:4 a lie. Instead, the reader is expected to fairly infer what is implied. Okay, so now what I want us to do is to take a look here. I'll show you what the book of Chronicles, how the Chronicles explains it. So 1 Chronicles 10:3. The battle became heavy against Saul, and the archers overtook him, and he was wounded by the archers. So you remember 1 Samuel 31 tells us that he was badly wounded. And so you could say that the Philistines killed him, as he probably would not have survived. 2 Samuel 21:12 mentions that it was the Philistines who struck down Saul. All right, well then verse 4, then Saul said to his armor-bearer, draw your sword and pierce me through with it. Otherwise these uncircumcised will come and pierce me through and make sport of me. But his armor-bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. So Saul took his sword and fell on it. And so you could say that Saul killed himself, since he delivered the final fatal blow. All right, then verses 13 and 14. So Saul died for his trespass, which he committed against the Lord, because of the word of the Lord, which he did not keep, and also because he asked counsel of a medium, making inquiry of it, and did not inquire of the Lord. Therefore he killed him and turned the kingdom to David, the son of Jesse. And so you could say that the Lord killed him, since he allowed it to happen, and Samuel prophesied ahead of time that it would happen. See, God is ultimately the one who's in control. What does that mean? Depending on your perspective, okay, or depending on the perspective, you could say the Philistines killed him, he killed himself, and God killed him. But this Amalekite did not kill him. He simply lied about it. Okay, so any questions or comments on that? Back here. Jason's got a hand up.
Is it possible that it could have been true? Maybe he just finished him off? Maybe he was still alive?
Well, it says that he fell on his sword and died. So I don't think so, because the way that he explained it is that Saul asked him to finish himself off. But the text says that Saul asked his servant, the servant said no, and so Saul fell on his sword, and then the servant fell on his sword. So that's what it actually says. I don't see any way that you can make these two things both be true at the same time. And again, looking at Chronicles explains that the Philistines killed him, he killed himself, and God killed him. Not this Amalekite in any way, shape, or form. So, okay. All right, let's go on. Who'd like to read verses? Oh, a hand over here. And then someone read verses 11 through 16.
You know, the Amalekite also said he found Saul leaning on his spear as opposed to the sword that we read about earlier. Is that also a difference?
Let's see. What did it say? Did it say anything about his spear back in chapter? Someone jump back to chapter 31.
Well, I was reading 31 and it said he fell on his sword.
Well, he fell on his sword.
And then this guy says...
Well, I think he's just saying he was leaning on a spear, meaning he couldn't hold himself up anymore. He's dying because he's filled with arrows. Okay. But yeah, maybe that, if 1 Samuel doesn't mention that. He often had his spear with him, but I don't know. Over here. It may have just been part of his fabrication, making it up.
Verse 9 says, stand here by me and kill me. I am in the throes of death, but I am still alive. That's meaning he's getting close to death himself.
Yeah, he's dying, definitely. Yeah, he was filled with arrows. Okay. All right, who'd like to read 11 through 16?
Then David took hold of his clothes and tore them, and so also did all the men who were with him. They mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the people of the Lord and the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. David said to the young man who told him, "Where are you from?" And he answered, "I am the son of an alien, an Amalekite." Then David said to him, "How is it you were not afraid to stretch out your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" And David called one of the young men and said, "Go cut him down." So he struck him, and he died. David said to him, "Your blood is on your head, for your mouth has testified against you, saying, I have killed the Lord's anointed."
Good. All right, so take a look at verse 14. That was the reason David did not kill him when he had those two perfect opportunities. Remember back in 1 Samuel 24 and 26. So this guy's plan backfired. He sought recognition and reward, but he got execution. Okay, so again, some people will go to any length for personal gain. Take a look here. We see his artificial sympathy, tearing his clothes in the dust. We see his excessive homage. It says he fell to the ground and prostrated himself. We see his lies, saying that he killed Saul. We see his thievery, stealing the items off of the king's body. So I know that some people, they would argue that the guy got what he deserved, at least somewhat. So anyway, the point is we must be very, very careful, because selfish ambition, it can get us in a lot of trouble. Because how many people, you think about it, how many people have resorted to lies or compromising their character or sacrificing their family just so they can climb the corporate ladder or get ahead in some other way? But it is probably not going to end well. Okay, who'd like to read verses 17 and 18? Back there.
David took up his lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan, and he ordered that the people of Judah be taught this lament of the bow. It is written in the book of Jeshar.
So, of course, David, he wrote quite a bit of poetry like this in his life, a lot of it found in the Psalms. All right, so where in the Old Testament is the book of Jeshar located? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua. Where is it located? Or Yashar, it could be pronounced. So yeah, the book of Jashar, it means the book of the upright. It's an extra biblical work. It was full of, apparently, it seems to have been full of Hebrew hero stories that were written poetically. We find parts of it quoted here in Joshua 10 and possibly Judges 5. But the book itself is no longer in existence. Some people are like, hey, wait a minute, I went on the internet and read it. Yes, okay, but what you find on the internet today as the book of Jashar was something that was written in the 13th to 16th century AD. And it's filled with anachronisms, all kinds of things that are out of place in time. It is not the original book of Jashar that was mentioned in the Old Testament. But again, people are always confused because they're like, hey, I could just go online and read it. No, that's not it. Okay, so here's the question. Why is it not in the Bible? Because, I mean, you got a book mentioned in the Bible that's not in the Bible? Why? Why is it not in the Bible? What's that? Because it starts with a J? Let's try. Any other ideas? Okay, so actually there are lots of books like that, but why are these books, for instance, 1 Corinthians is actually 2 Corinthians, as we see, as Paul said. Remember in Colossians, he mentioned his letter to the Laodiceans. Anyway, there are a number of these books that are mentioned by the Bible that are not in the Bible. Why not? Why don't we have them? What's that? Well, we haven't found them, but isn't God behind these books? Why didn't God make sure these books were preserved in the Bible? We don't need them. I think that's got to be the answer, because we don't need them. God is God. He's going to make sure the books that we need are in there. All right, so, but yes, it would be cool, though, if we found them. You know, maybe someday we will. We dig up the book of Jashar, but I still don't believe it belongs in the Bible. But the original ancient book of Jashar, that'd be cool. Or let's say we dug up 1 Corinthians the real 1 Corinthians, not what we have, which is actually 2 Corinthians. Anyway, I just don't think we need him, because it's not in there. Okay, who'd like to read this one?
I was going to make a point about your question. It is interesting to me, at least in the New Testament era, that because they copied so many of these letters and people made copies of it, the ones that we have seem to have been copied a lot. And so very early on, it was apparent which ones the early Christians deemed
Scripture.
inspired and
Yes.
Scripture, and copied them over and over.
Yeah, and when you read you read the church fathers, we call them, the early Christians in the first few centuries, they quote from all the books in the New Testament, but they're not quoting from these other books. So yeah, what we've got are clearly what the church believed to be, and they use the term Scripture for those things, definitely. And so again, I think you got to say, God is God. He made sure we have what we need. So, all right, who'd like to read this? 19 through 27. Over here.
A gazelle lies slain on your heights, Israel, how the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon. Lest the daughters of the Philistines be glad, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised rejoice. Mountains of Gilboa, may you have neither dew nor rain, may no showers fall on your terraced fields. For there the shield of the mighty was despised, the shield of Saul no longer rubbed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the flesh of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back. The sword of Saul did not return unsatisfied. Saul and Jonathan, in life they were loved and admired, and in death they were not parted. They were swifter than the eagles, they were stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and finery, who adorned your garments with ornaments of gold. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. How the mighty have fallen, the weapons of war have perished.
Good. Okay, so extremely poetic, right? With all these pictures of what happened on Mount Gilboa. And he's talking about, the worst thing would be that the uncircumcised gloating and rejoicing in this thing that had happened. And he talks about, he kind of like gives this poetic curse on the mountain that, no dew or rain be on you and all of that. The mountain, it's like the mountain should be punished for what happened on there, what it allowed to happen or something. And then his shield not anointed with oil. The enemy, I assume, took his shield, so of course it wasn't cleaned and polished with oil after the battle. And he talks about their fighting skills, the bow of Jonathan, the sword of Saul. I mean, they died, but they got their licks in, before they died. And he talks about how they weren't parted in death. In other words, they died together on the mountain. They didn't, one of them didn't have to mourn the other one. It says, this is interesting. It talks about, O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you luxuriously in scarlet and put ornaments of gold on your apparel. And so he had brought them prosperity, I assume, with all of his victories over the Philistines. And then, of course, you got the controversial part here. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You have been very pleasant to me, or dear to me, as that your translation has it. Your love to me was more wonderful than the love of women. And so he's poetically saying that Jonathan's love for him was stronger than a wife's love for her husband or a mother's love for her son. This is certainly not speaking of their sexual preference, as the LGBT community often claims today. And, okay, here's the thing. Even if it were true, which it's not, would he teach this to Judah and it end up in the book of Jasher, verse 18? It's called an abomination in the law. Leviticus 18:22 and chapter 20, verse 13. He certainly would have kept it a secret if it was actually true. Okay, like in English, the Hebrew word for love was a bit ambiguous, but in the Septuagint, okay, so the Greek translation of the Old Testament, they translated this as agape, the unconditional love, and not eros, the erotic love. Anyway, if you want to know more about this silliness, in my estimation, but anyway, you want to know more about this so you can answer people, Apologetics Press, they've got a good article on their website that discusses it in detail. And again, Apologetics Press, they've been around for so long, and they have so many videos, so many articles, and all these things. If a skeptic or someone comes to you with a claim against the Bible, against God, against Christianity, my first place to go is Apologetics Press. They've probably dealt with it in some way, in some fashion, or some form or fashion. Okay, so yeah, how have the mighty fallen and the weapons of war perished? So anyway, you look at the respect here that David, he always showed to his enemy Saul. How do we normally treat our enemies? How do we, normally react when they fall? Well, if I got an enemy and he slips and falls and he messes up, yes! What did Jesus say? Jesus told us to love and pray for our enemies, Matthew 5:44. And the proverbialist told us not to rejoice when our enemy falls, Proverbs 24:17 and 18. Do not rejoice when your enemy falls. Do not let your heart be glad when he stumbles, or the Lord will see it and be displeased and turn his anger away from him. So anyway, yeah, David's a great example. And so if David could even find good in Saul, what does that say about you and me and our puny enemies? All right, so before moving on, any questions or comments on chapter 1? Before we go on to chapter 2, back here.
A couple of things. When you were talking about the guy at the first, excuse me, he seems to be a real opportunist. I mean, he sees the situation and he takes advantage of it. Okay, even if he was the guy who killed Saul, even if he told that truth, I believe that because of the way that he did this, he would have been killed anyway. David would never have let him live because David protected Saul all the way through. And then also, I think it's just such a tribute, but you just touched on it, that he didn't rejoice in the fall of Saul. Saul was his father-in-law. Saul had known him when he was a young man. He had watched Saul's downfall into whatever this mental illness that he had. And we're not supposed to rejoice when someone starts going downhill. I mean, it's a really sad, sad thing, the way that Saul ended up.
Yeah.
And you see David as a very mature in this attitude right here.
Yeah, I do think he's definitely very mature and something that we need to emulate in that when it comes to our enemies. Good. Anyone else have a... Choo-choo, you got a hand up? No? That's not a hand? That's a half hand. Okay. All right. So we go on now to the 2 kings. Who'd like to start us off here with verses 1 through 7? Oh, few hands. We'll get you guys. Thank you.
It happened after this that David inquired of the Lord, saying, "Shall I go up to any of the cities of Judah?" And the Lord said to him, "Go up." David said, "Where shall I go up?" And he said, "To Hebron." So David went up there, and his 2 wives also, Ahinoam and Jezreelitess, and Abigail the widow of Nabal the Carmelite. And David brought up the men who were with him, every man with his household. So they dwelt in the cities of Hebron. Then the men of Judah came, and they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying, "The men of Jabesh Gilead were the ones who buried Saul." So David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead, and said to them, "You are blessed of the Lord, for you have shown this kindness to your Lord, to Saul, and have buried him. And now may the Lord show kindness and truth to you. I also will repay you for this kindness, because you have done this thing. Now therefore let your hands be strengthened and be valiant, for your master Saul is dead, and also the house of Judah has anointed me king over them.
Good. So again, we see David inquiring of the Lord before making decisions. David would never take the throne until God said he could. And so he's probably, of course, still inquiring through the priest Abiathar. You remember about that guy. Okay, so Hebron, it was about 20 miles south of Jerusalem, one of the major cities in Judah at that time. And you may remember from Genesis that Sarah died at Hebron, and Abraham, he bought the cave of Machpelah for a burial place in Genesis 23. Okay, so David's patience and his trust, and trusting in the Lord, have finally paid off. Psalm 37:34, David said, "Wait for the Lord and keep his way, and he will exalt you to inherit the land. When the wicked are cut off, you will see it." Now, David, of course, at this time, he's just king over Judah. And his kingdom, it's kind of, you're going to see it's be set up kind of just piece by piece. So this is the second time he was anointed. Remember, he was anointed by Samuel. So this is the second time he's anointed over Judah, and he will be anointed a third time then over all of them, over the whole country later. So verse 7, it sounds that David was doing some campaigning here, trying to get them to join his kingdom. Okay, so they were just north of Ishbosheth's capital, Mahanaim, which we're going to read about. It might have been some kind of tactical ploy. See, David was very strategically minded. Okay, all right, let's go on. Who'd like to read verses 8 through 11? Who's got this? Get the next one.
I'll butcher the names, but
Oh, that's okay. Just pretend you know how to pronounce them.
meanwhile, Abner, son of Ner, the commander of Saul's army, had taken Ishbosheth, son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. He made him king over Gilead, Ashuri, and Jezreel, and also over Ephraim, Benjamin, and all of Israel. Ishbosheth, son of Saul, was 40 years old when he became king over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. The tribe of Judah, however, remained loyal to David. The length of time David was king in Hebron over Judah was 7 years and 6 months.
Good. So this place, Mahanaim or Mahanaim, it was on the east side of the Jordan. Now, okay, so this is kind of funny. The name Ishbosheth means man of shame, and it was probably the nickname that the author of 2 Samuel gave him. Because he could be the son that we read in 1 Samuel 14:49 named Ishvi. But he was also, this is interesting, because he was also called Eshbaal in 1 Chronicles 8:33. I don't know, it says something about Saul naming one of his children after Baal. I don't know. But although some people, they try to give him the benefit of the doubt. They say, well, the Baal, it just means master, and so maybe he's just using it in the generic sense of master. I don't know. All right, so why did Abner set up Ishbosheth as king? He's still loyal to the house of Saul, but I think it was really about power. Because as we're going to see, it almost seems that Ishbosheth is really, he's just a puppet king, and Abner's really the one who's in charge. So he's crowned king over the northern tribes on both sides of the Jordan River. Now, some people think the distance, or the difference here in years from verses 10 and 11 shows that Ishbosheth, he only had the title of king during David's last 2 years in Hebron. And so it's possible that Abner, it took him 5 years to recover the northern territory from the Philistines after that battle, before he could install Ishbosheth as king over it. Don't know. All right, so what was the difference between David becoming king and Ishbosheth becoming king. What's the difference? What's that? God, yes. Ishbosheth was crowned king by the people and not by God. Very good. David sought the Lord's will, but Abner simply did what he wanted to do. And so here's something important. Attachment to king and country, like everything else, must be secondary to God and his will. Okay, verses 12 through 17. Who'd like to get this? Up here. Thank you. So verses 12 through 17.
Abner, son of Ner, together with the men of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, left Mahanaim and went to Gibeon. Joab, son of Zeruiah, and David's men went out and met them at the pool of Gibeon. One group sat down on one side of the pool, and one group on the other side. Then Abner said to Joab, "Let's have some of the young men get up and fight hand to hand in front of us." "All right then, let them do that." So they stood up and were counted off, 12 men for Benjamin and Ishbosheth, son of Saul, and 12 for David. Then each man grabbed his opponent by the head, then thrust his dagger into his opponent's side, and they fell down together. So that place in Gibeon was called Helkath Hazarim. The battle that day was fierce, very fierce, and Abner and the men and the Israelites were defeated by David's men.
Good. All right, so Gibeon was about 5 to 6 miles north of Jerusalem, and it's referred to in Jeremiah 41:12 as a place with a great pool. Well, it's interesting. In the 1950s, archaeologists uncovered this ancient, seriously deep cylindrical pool in that area with 79 steps going down into it. And so it may have been this one. A lot of people think it probably was, but anyway, it's a good possibility. So they decided to get champions from both sides and have a small battle. It talked about the Benjamites. Remember, the Benjamites were his tribesmen. So Helkath Hazarim means field of sword edges. Anyway, all 24 of these contestants, or whatever you want to call them, died. I'm sure it was quite a thing to watch. And so because of that, we can see from verse 17 that a general battle was necessary after that, since their small thing didn't work. Okay, so let's go on. Who'd like to read 18 through 23? Oh, go ahead. Who's got a comment?
Testing. Okay, there it is. So all the men died that were fighting. Mm-hmm. And then in 17, the battle that day was very fierce, and Abner and the Israelites were defeated by David's men.
Yeah, so what happens is they decided to have this small skirmish. So let's have some champions fight, And so they did. The problem is they all died, and so they had to have just a general battle then, with all of them after that. Because they all died, there was no winner. So, again, I think it must have been pretty wild to watch that, them, all of them dying, killing each other. Good. Oh, you want to read? You're allowed. Thank you. Yes.
Now the three sons of Zeruiah were there, Joab and Abishai and Asahel. And Asahel was as swift-footed as one of the gazelles which is in the field. Asahel pursued Abner and did not turn to the right or to the left from following Abner. Then Abner looked behind him and said, "Is that you, Asahel?" And he answered, "It is I." So Abner said to him, "Turn to your right or to your left, and take hold of one of the young men for yourself, and take for yourself his spoil." But Asahel was not willing to turn aside from following him. Abner repeated again to Asahel, "Turn aside from following me. Why should I strike you to the ground? How then could I lift up my face to your brother Joab?" However, he refused to turn aside. Therefore Abner struck him in the belly with the butt end of the spear, so that the spear came out of his back, and he fell there and died on the spot.
And it came about that all who came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died stood still.
Good. Okay, so we learned from 1 Chronicles 2:16 that Zeruiah was David's sister. And so these are David's nephews. And so it seems that Asahel, he wanted the glory of being the one who killed Abner. You know, he's strong and he's super fast, and well, he just assumed that he could do it. And so Abner said no. He told him to fight with with another Israelite, and then be content with the spoil of an inferior soldier as a trophy. But it sounds, and of course it sounds here as if he's kind of afraid of Joab's vengeance. Joab would go after him as the avenger of blood. And so anyway, this term to lift up someone's face, it just means you look someone in the eye with a clear conscience that you haven't wronged the person. Or as the NIV puts it, how could I look your brother Joab in the face? Now it's possible that the end of his spear was pointed as well. And it could be, some people wonder if that's how it would stick it in the ground with that side. But some people think that Asahel was running so fast, he didn't have time to turn the spear around. And so anyway, it happened as it says. Pretty gruesome. And so it says they stood still when they came by him. And it was either to mourn him or realizing what this is going to entail. Think about the possible consequences of this action. And sure enough, Joab killed Abner, later. Joab later killed Abner for it. But again, selfish ambition, right? It can really cloud our judgment. Asahel, he wanted to be recognized as the dude. He wanted to be recognized as being the one who killed Abner. He wanted it so bad that he couldn't see that Abner was the superior soldier. Asahel was not a team player. And he paid the price for it. Okay, 24 through 29. Who's got this one?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
24. But Joab and Abishai pursued Abner, and when the sun was going down, they came to the hill of Ammah, which is opposite Gear by way of the wilderness of Gibeon. And the sons of Benjamin gathered together behind Abner and became one troop, and they stood on the top of a hill. Then Abner called to Joab and said, "Should the sword devour forever? Do you not realize that it will be bitter to the end? So how long will you refrain from telling the people to turn back from pursuing their kinsmen?" Joab said, "As God lives, if you had not spoken, then the people of Judah certainly would have withdrawn in the morning, each from pursuing his brother." So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the people halted and no longer pursued Israel, nor did they continue to fight anymore. Abner and his men then went through the Arabah all that night. So they crossed the Jordan and walked all morning and came to Mahanaim.
Okay, so anyway, we see Abner is desperately trying to save his men and himself from extermination here, and Joab accepted his words. There are different ways of translating what Joab said, but that's not really important. In the Arabah, that's the wasteland around the Dead Sea. But this is interesting. When you finish it up with verses 30 through 32, you see that David only lost, when the whole thing was said and done, David only lost 19 men next to 360 on the other side. Just a huge difference here. And so here we have the civil war beginning between the house of David and the house of Saul, which we're going to read about next week. But here's my question. How unnecessary was all of this? If they simply would have consulted God and then they would have followed his will, then none of this would have happened. Can this apply to us? Church splits, church divisions, they often come about because of people wanting what they want. They don't consult or follow what God has said in his word. Now, that's not always the case, but it is sometimes, or a lot of times. But we need to keep in mind that this is not our church. It's his church. And so we're to follow only what he has said. And then, of course, we are to be diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace, Ephesians 4:3. Okay, Lots of lessons in here, but we didn't really have time to talk about them. You got a bunch of them, I think.